Today we have this year's new vanilla iPhone, the iPhone 15. It isn't a Pro model, so you wouldn't expect the cutting-edge features here, but the iPhone 15 actually does bring quite a few updates compared to last year. I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's see what this phone is all about in our full review. As ever, the new iPhone 15 brings the same overall iPhone formula, with some incremental refinements. But the changes are noticeable, and they bring the regular iPhone 15 in line with last year's Pro models. For example, rather than a notch cutout, now you get the pill-shaped dynamic island, which last year was exclusive to the Pros. And compared to the iPhone 14, you get a new, brighter display, a new 48-megapixel main camera, and a chipset upgrade. In terms of the design, the iPhone 15 is basically identical to the previous iPhone generations. Again, the back is flat and made of glass. The glass is etched to provide a matte finish. The rounded corners and flat aluminum frame are familiar, though now the frame has a contoured edge where it meets the glass. Just as before, the iPhone 15 comes with IP68 rated ingress protection, and it can survive in up to 6 meters of fresh water for up to 30 minutes. But this year, Apple has finally made the move from Lightning to USB Type-C, the standard used on basically all other smartphones. However, the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus get USB 2.0 rather than the speedier USB 3 on the Pro models. And something else worth mentioning is that on this model, you still get your typical alert slider, while on this year's Pro models that has been replaced with an action key. The OLED display of the iPhone 15 is 6.1 inches, with a sharp pixel density of 461 ppi, and like last year, there's only a 60Hz refresh rate. One of these generations, Apple should give us a high refresh rate on a vanilla iPhone, but not this time. This means your swiping and scrolling will again appear less smooth to the eye than on most other phones, which feature 90Hz or above. I mentioned earlier the screen's brightness, and when maxing out the manual slider, we achieved around 800 nits, about the same as on the iPhone 14. But unlike last year's model, the iPhone 15's auto brightness mode has the ability to provide a boost when in bright conditions, like direct sunlight. With this boost kicking in, we measured nearly 1650 nits maximum, a huge improvement. Besides the extra brightness, the display behaves much the same as last year. It's extremely color accurate, and there's support for True Tone, which keeps colors looking consistent in various lighting conditions. There's also support for HDR10 and Dolby Vision. Probably the most notable change is the pill-shaped cutout rather than a notch. This cutout houses the selfie cam and the 3D TOF camera, which is used for Apple's Face ID. It's fast and responsive as ever. You also get the full dynamic island functionality, where the UI extends the black bar to show relevant info, as well as display shortcuts to call up certain apps from the background. For audio, the iPhone 15 has a stereo speaker setup with Dolby Atmos support. The speakers are a little quieter this time around, with a loudness score of good, versus last year's very good. But the audio quality is excellent all around, from bass to mids and highs. You can hear for yourself through the provided link. You can get the iPhone 15 with 128, 256, or 512 gigs of storage, and though that isn't expandable through microSD, you can attach USB storage. The new iPhones run Apple's latest iOS 17 out of the box, and is pretty much the same experience as the previous version, with a few new features sprinkled in. You don't get a typical always-on display with the iPhone 15 like you would on the Pro models. But there is support for the new standby mode, which is an always-on display which turns on while the phone is charging in landscape orientation. On top of the extensive widget support we had before, now there are interactive widgets, which you can manipulate on the home screen itself. There is also more customization available for your contacts, with a feature called Contact Posters. You have plenty of options, including photos, memojis, and text. Some other new features in iOS 17 include voice isolation during calls, offline maps, live voicemail, and sharing passwords with friends. The iPhone 15 brings an upgraded Ultrawide 2 chip for more precise location finding for the Find My Friends feature. And like the other new iPhones, it supports video output via Type-C alt mode. It's basically display mirroring. On all of the iPhone 15 models, you get letterboxing on a standard 16:9 external display, except with certain apps such as Netflix, which support full screen output. The iPhone 15 also supports USB host mode, through which you can connect peripherals like a mouse or keyboard or an external hard drive. I mentioned that the iPhone 15's upgrades bring it in line with last year's Pro model, and that's most apparent with the Apple A16 Bionic chipset. It's the same as in the iPhone 14 Pro, and a nice upgrade over the A15 Bionic and the regular iPhone 14, both when it comes to raw power and power efficiency. In CPU benchmarks, the iPhone 15 comes in near the top of the charts, only outpaced by the iPhone 15 Pro models with their newer silicon. It also holds its own in graphics tests against some of the top Android devices running a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. So even though you don't get the cutting-edge Apple silicon here, the peak performance is still among the best. The thermal management does leave more to be desired though, at least when it comes to GPU performance. In our prolonged graphics stress test, the iPhone 15's GPU throttled down to around 50% of its initial performance. CPU-intensive tasks fare much better, and the throttling there was negligible. But outside of the benchmarks, we didn't notice any stutters or drops in performance while gaming, and the phone never got uncomfortably hot. The iPhone 15 has a 3,349 mAh battery, and in our tests, scored a solid endurance rating of 98 hours, better than last year's iPhone 14 Pro, despite having the same chipset. Similar to previous iPhone models, the iPhone 15 officially supports 20-watt power delivery charging, but there's no charger in the box. With a proper adapter, we were able to charge the phone from 0 to 58% in 30 minutes, and a full charge took an hour and 50 minutes. Not terribly fast. There's also support for wireless charging and MagSafe support for those magnetized wireless chargers. The iPhone 15 has two cameras on the back, a new 48-megapixel main cam and a 12-megapixel ultrawide cam. It's not the same as the new 48-megapixel cam on the Pro models, but in a similar fashion, it outputs 24-megapixel photos by default. Looking at the daylight photos, it's apparent that there's plenty of detail here, more than we got from last year's 12-megapixel camera. The sharpness is great, and there's nice contrast and good dynamic range too. And as you'd expect from an iPhone, the consistency from shot to shot is excellent. Also typical of Apple, the color science is very accurate, but looks quite muted compared to the punchy rendition popular with most other manufacturers. You can also take photos in 12 megapixels, which does save a little bit of space, but there's noticeably less fine detail if you go this route, especially in foliage. There's a 2x zoom toggle, and these photos are nice. They come out in 12 megapixel resolution, and certain things like foliage can look a bit fuzzy. But otherwise, the overall rendition is nearly identical to the regular one-time shots. Portrait photos from the main cam look great, with sharp-looking subjects, excellent skin tones, and really nice separation, even though there's no LiDAR scanner like you get on the Pro model. With the new automatic portraits feature, the camera can detect a scene suitable for a portrait and give you a pop-up to quickly toggle a portrait effect on the fly. And on top of that, even when you don't actively press the F toggle, the iPhone will still capture a depth map, so you can go into the Photos app and turn the photo into a portrait later. It even works for selfies too. In low light, photos from the main cam are excellent, with great detail and sharpness, and a natural color rendition. The dynamic range is pretty wide, despite the darker shadows. Highlights are handled really well. There is automatic night mode processing, but the trouble is that it's hard to predict when it will kick in. The automatic detection is quite conservative, and in many scenes it may not trigger. When it does though, you get brighter and less noisy shadows, and some extra sharpening. The night mode photos also come out in 12 megapixels rather than 24. The iPhone 15 can capture video in up to 4K resolution on all of its cameras. The video quality from the main camera is great, with rich detail and wide dynamic range. The picture is clean, with no noise, and while the colors aren't exactly punchy, they look good. The main cam has sensor shift OIS, but electronic stabilization is also available across all the cameras. It works great to smooth out bumps and shakes. In low light, the main cam can capture some excellent videos. They're crisp, with natural looking colors, plenty of detail, and low noise. Now let's talk about the ultrawide cam. Its performance is actually a bit disappointing. The 12 megapixel photos come out looking a bit soft and lacking in fine detail, with some visible noise. And since this camera lacks autofocus, you can't use it to show close-up subjects like you can with the ultrawide on the Pro models. At least the iPhone 15 does a good job at matching the contrast, colors, and dynamic range to those of the main camera. At night, the ultrawide cam struggles. Its shots are quite noisy. While shadows are handled decently, you can end up with blown highlights. The color rendition is notably warmer as well. Just like with the main cam, the automatic night mode doesn't activate very reliably. When it does kick in, the noise is cleaned up somewhat and the exposure is brighter, but there is excessive sharpening added as well. When it comes to video capture, the Ultrawide does a decent job. Its 4K videos are clean, with colors that match the main cams pretty well. Finally, there's the 12 megapixel selfie cam, which has autofocus. It captures sharp photos with pleasant skin tones, great contrast and dynamic range, and plenty of detail. Some details in the face do come out too pronounced though, which could be unflattering. So there you have it, the iPhone 15. Apple didn't reinvent the wheel here, but there are some nice upgrades over the vanilla iPhone 14. You get the brighter display, faster chipset, and nicer 48 megapixel main cam. And there's the dynamic island too, which lends a slightly more modern look. These may not be enough reasons to upgrade from the iPhone 14, but if you're coming from an older iPhone, the 15 looks like the nicer phone of the two for just $100 more. And if you can spare an extra 10% on top of that, the outgoing iPhone 14 Pro, where it's still available, will get you a stainless steel frame, a high refresh rate display, and 3 times optical zoom. But still, the cheaper iPhone 15 is lighter, with longer battery life and longer software support, and it comes with the super universal USB-C connectivity. So we think the vanilla iPhone 15 is well worth considering if you're planning to get an iPhone. Thanks for watching, guys. If you're looking for alternatives to the iPhone 15, you can check out our reviews of the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Pro. See you next time.